The Night Stalker. Have you ever wondered what goes on inside the mind of a serial killer? How do they end up in the position where everything they do makes sense only to their own mind and no one else's? How did they spiral into the path they tread, and what role did the vices of society play in the agony they caused to the innocents? One such incident, or rather a series of events, happened in the state of California and were perpetrated by a man known as Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, to Julian and Mercedes Ramirez, amidst the Cold War in a bipolar world. Richard was the fifth and youngest child in the Ramirez household. Richard's father was a chronic alcohol abuser who would sometimes lash out on his wife and children, including Richard. This would turn out to be the first of many traumatic experiences during his childhood. Richard started smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol at the tender age of 10 and dropped out of Jefferson High School in the 9th grade. Miguel Ramirez, or Mike, was Richard's cousin and had a great influence on Richard's childhood as they would hang out together a lot. Mike was a decorated Green Beret in the Army who served in the Vietnam War for the United States Army. Mike would often share Polaroid pictures of Vietnamese women who he and his comrades raped, abused, and murdered by decapitation. Mike also allegedly taught Richard some of his Army recognizance and sneaking techniques, which would later go on to help him commit some heinous crimes. A few years later, Mike fatally shot his wife at point-blank range in the face in the presence of Richard. Mike wasn't convicted of killing his wife, taking into account his PTSD, and was treated for several years at the Texas State Mental Hospital. Shortly after witnessing the death of his sister-in-law, Richard moved in with his elder sister Ruth and her husband Roberto. Roberto was an obsessive sexual offender who would spy on women through their windows. He was later joined on his voyeuristic quests by Richard and Mike after he was released from the mental hospital. By the time Richard was 14 years old, he was severely addicted to LSD, which is known for its hallucinogenic effects. Later on, he acquired a very potent drug called angel dust, originally used as a horse tranquilizer. It was a very effective chemical, able to cause delirium and mania in many of its users. It is believed that it was right around this time that he came to know of satanic cults and was influenced by a book called The Satanic Bible. Richard would later allegedly drive down to San Francisco to meet with the author and participate in some of the rituals where he first experienced the presence of Satan. Right around 1977, when Mike was released from the mental hospital, and in between all of the perverted adventures of Roberto, Richard, and Mike, Richard got a job at a Holiday Inn where he regularly stole from guests using his passkey and even attempted to rape a woman, but was stopped and thrashed by the victim's husband. All the charges against Richard were dropped because the couple wasn't able to come down to Texas's court to testify against him. In 1982, Richard moved to California, where he permanently settled down and completely cut ties with his family. During his time in California, Richard would frequently move between San Francisco and Los Angeles County. Richard's sister tried to track him down in California, where she found him living in a cheap residential apartment and severely addicted to cocaine. Upon being asked where he got the money to sustain his addiction, Richard revealed that he was involved in a lot of burglaries and house invasions. Richard also stated that the reason he hadn't gotten caught was that he had the blessing of Satan with him. While Richard lived in San Francisco, he murdered a Chinese-origin girl named Mai Ling on April 10, 1984, in the basement of his apartment building near Tenderloin, San Francisco. On the night of the said event, 9-year-old May was looking for a $1 bill with her 8-year-old brother. Richard manipulated Mai into following her into the basement by promising to help find her money. When they reached the basement, Richard beat, raped, and strangled Mai before killing her with a switchblade and hanging her naked body from a pipe with the help of her blouse. Richard was convicted of this murder years after he was incarcerated for the murders, which were followed by the help of DNA evidence found at the basement of the crime scene. In 2016, officials also released data on a second suspect who could have been a collaborator in the rape and murder of Mai Ling, but was never found due to a lack of evidence. On June 28, 1984, Richard made his first kill in Los Angeles. His victim, a 79-year-old woman named Jenny Vinkow, was killed by Richard while asleep by constant stabs to the head, neck, and chest. Forensic scientists revealed that the cut on Jenny's neck was so deep that she was nearly decapitated, while her head remained attached to the body only by a few shreds of her spine. The investigative team was able to connect this to Richard through a fingerprint they found on the window mesh, which he removed to gain access to the apartment. After this event, Richard kept a low profile and didn't commit any hefty crimes for about a year, but this slump was just the silence before the storm. On March 17, 1985, Richard waited for 22-year-old Maria Hernandez in her garage and instantly shot her with a .22 caliber handgun the moment she entered the garage in her car. Maria's roommate, Yoshi Okazaki, on hearing the gunshot and observing disturbances, hid behind the kitchen counter. Maria survived the shot Richard fired because she had the car keys in her hand, which she raised to protect herself instinctively. Maria played dead until Richard left her. As Richard passed through the kitchen, Okazaki tried to peek by raising her head off the counter. She was instantly killed by a shot to the forehead. Within an hour of the murder and another attempted murder, Richard pulled a 30-year-old Tsai Liang, Veronica Yu, out of her car near Monterey Park and shot her. Richard fled the scene afterwards, and Veronica was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. At this point in time, Richard had caught the attention of the media, and his facial features were broadcast on California news to hunt him down. He was dubbed the Night Stalker and the Valley Intruder by the media. The next victims of Richard were 64-year-old Vincent Charles Zazera and his wife, Maxine Lavinia Zazera, age 44. Richard killed Charles in his sleep and bound Maxine. The Zazera household was burglarized a year earlier by Richard, who asked Maxine where all the valuables were kept. While Richard was busy looting, Maxine freed herself and got hold of a shotgun, which was empty. This infuriated Richard, who gouged her eyeballs out and carried them with him in a jewelry box. At this point in time, the police connected the dots and realized that a serial killer was loose on the streets. Richard had a pattern of killing that was very unorthodox for a serial killer. He wasn't meticulous in planning his murders and was almost acting on instinct. He didn't choose his victims based on any kind of characteristic, such as origin, caste, creed, etc., which threw off police investigators for months. Richard made a habit of killing the husband and raping the wife. Richard, while riding a stolen vehicle, broke into the home of two elderly ladies. He bound, beat, and raped them. After he was done looting their home, he drew a satanic pentagram on one of the ladies' thighs and one on a wall as well. They were admitted to the hospital, where one of them succumbed to her injuries. The thing that gave Richard his unique identity among the strata of serial killers was his obsession with Satanism. When his victims would beg him for mercy and start swearing to God, he made them swear to Satan instead. This act filled him up with gratification, as he thought he was doing the devil's bidding. How Richard was caught. Richard did a very sleazy job of hiding his fingerprints and footprints on all his murder scenes. The police struggled at the beginning of the investigation due to scattered evidence and no recognizably identifiable murder pattern. Finally, the investigators were able to connect the murders through the bullet casings found at the scenes of the murder and footprints leading out of the houses of the victims. The police had a major breakthrough when they found out the size and brand of the shoes of the serial killer and were able to locate the distributor who sold them. All of this progress was flushed down the drain when Mayor Feinstein decided to make this information public, which tipped off Richard, who got rid of the shoes, but not his gun. During one of his escapades, Richard left behind a fingerprint which the police certainly knew belonged to the Night Stalker. They ran his fingerprint through a newly developed fingerprint matching technology, which matched the fingerprint to those of previous offenders. The police were also in hot pursuit of the items Richard stole and sold off to black market dealers. The fingerprints matched with Richard's from when he earlier stole a car in 1984, and his mugshot was released in the newspaper. Richard had no idea his identity had been revealed. He nonchalantly went to meet his brother in Arizona on the bus. Upon reaching there, he was unable to meet him as he wasn't home. While returning, Richard passed through a couple of policemen who were specifically stationed at the bus stop to try and stop him from escaping. Richard finally realized that he had been found out when a Spanish lady referred to him as El Matador, which translated to murderer in Spanish. Richard tried to escape by jacking a car, but was caught by the public and almost lynched to death. He was arrested by a few policemen and taken to the Hollenbeck police station. At the end of his mayhem-filled reign of terror that night, Richard was charged with 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The court trial and the interview. On the first day of the trial, Richard entered the courtroom in an all-black outfit with a pentagram drawn on his hand. He raised his hand in the air, shouting, "Hail Satan!" During his trial, the prison guards overheard Richard plan on smuggling a gun and shooting the prosecutor during the trial. After the news of a murder attempt got out, intensive searches were carried out on the people attending the trial. Later, during the trial, a jury member was unable to attend the trial, and it was revealed that she was shot in her apartment. Many people thought that the attack had been orchestrated from inside the cell by Richard, but the theory was later put down as the jury member was shot by her boyfriend. Richard sat for interviews conducted by the media, which were broadcast on TV, and many people were fascinated by his thoughts and beliefs. Richard accused the government and the social system of their wrongdoings. He blamed the government, stating that they did every kind of dirty work and propaganda to meet their goals, which are being overlooked by people. But his deeds have been single-handedly pointed out, and he was being punished for the work he did for the betterment of society by killing a few cowards. Richard gained a lot of sympathy and admirers from these interviews. Many people bought into the ideals of the Night Stalker and felt pity for him. Richard started receiving mail while he was on death row in prison, and also got married to a woman named Doreen Leoy in the San Quentin State County Prison. Doreen later left him when the murder and rape charges of 9-year-old Mei Ling against Richard were proven. Before dying in 2013, Richard was engaged to a 23-year-old woman. So there you have it. Do you think the experience and trauma Richard had at a young age caused his breakdown as he grew up and led him to become the serial killer that he was? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video fascinating, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories. Thanks for watching, and see you soon in the next video.